since the previous class. So I'll just first I'll go through a review what we have uh, seen till now. In the introduction part, what we have seen till now is first of all basics of how a computer works, means the various parts of the computer as an overview, the hard disk, CPU, RAM, and the fact that everything remains in hard disk, and when it executes, all the applications, all the files remains in hard disk in terms of zeros and ones in binary format, and when it is executed it comes to the RAM, right? And eventually every application is in fact a sequence of instructions, and when some application needs to be executed, it first comes to RAM, and then the instructions get executed one by one starting from the first instruction. And as everything gets stored in the format of 0 and 1, so eventually, and obviously there is no limit in the information that we can store using computer. So obviously every information can be represented, every information we can imagine and we can think about, or any information that exists can be represented in terms of zeros and ones. But how? So in that case, to study that, we have discussed about the binary number system, and in fact it's loading from the cloud. So as the binary number system, there we have binary number system, we have seen that we can represent any positive integer. In fact, one by one we have seen that we can represent any positive integer into the binary number system by continuously dividing by 2, and once we have the corresponding binary number, we can convert it back to decimal or any other base. In fact, from binary to decimal directly by simply multiplying by the corresponding powers of 2, and that's how so in fact I think you can remember how we convert from binary to decimal the positive integers. Then we have seen how to add two positive integers in binary, right? And using that fact, right, is a simple step-by-step binary addition. Then how we can represent negative numbers. We have seen two types of representation, one's complement and two's complement. As we know that one's complement is not used in today's representation, rather two's complement is the dominant one. And any electronic device that you can think about, it is representing negative numbers using two's complement, that is taking one's complement then adding 1 to it. Then we have seen a few more examples of two's complement, and eventually how to subtract two numbers. We have seen binary addition, and then the binary subtraction. Binary subtraction is eventually subtract the second number, that means a minus b, eventually it is a plus, that means addition of a and minus b, and minus b means two's complement of b, and then add that to a using the binary addition technique that we have seen here. Then we have seen the number representation, eventually the various ways of representing number, because in the two's complement, suppose we have a two's complement and we have some numbers, say like 110. I think it has been written down here. No, okay, just if we have some number like say 1101011. Now when the first bit is 1, this representation eventually computer, as you have also seen, computer only takes these bits blindly and does the operation that you tell it to do, right? How we represent this number, this any binary bit pattern, how we represent that, that's completely at the user level. That's completely how we represent that, how our application represent that, what is the protocol to represent any binary number. And there we have seen that we can represent this number. Obviously we can consider this number in two ways. Either we can consider this as the negative number, or we can consider this completely as a all the bits as value bits and this complete as the positive number. The first one goes as the signed representation and the second one goes as the unsigned representation. So depending on how we represent a number, there we have seen these two representations, signed and unsigned. In the signed, eventually it is considered as the 2's complement. This bit pattern is considered the 2's complement, and in the unsigned, all the bits are considered as the value bits, right? And we get the corresponding positive numbers. In unsigned representation, we can never obtain any negative number. And then we have seen the various arithmetic operations, and in the various arithmetic operations, whether you do it on signed number or unsigned number, eventually it is limited by the storage we are using to store that particular number. Okay, and here you have seen that in arithmetic operation, smaller numbers are expanded to larger ones, keeping the sign bit intact. That means if you have, say, the smaller number is a negative number. As for example, suppose we have this number up to 1 month. Some of you is unmuted. Kindly mute yourself. We have up to this number, and we have considered it as a signed representation. That means it's a negative number. So when I'll expand it to say 32 bits, we will consider all the sign bits as 1. Similarly for the other number. Right. That means when you store some particular number, some of you is unmuted. Kindly mute yourself. Mrityunjay, kindly mute yourself. Okay. So eventually it gets expanded to 32-bit numbers. And similarly, when we have a positive number, we will expand it using zeros to cover 32-bit numbers. This depends on the. Suppose you want to store this 1101, this negative number. Suppose this is a signed representation of some negative number, and you want to store it as 32 bits. Eventually, the expansion will be done using all ones. And after dealing with everything about integers, that means positive and negative integers and their addition and subtraction, then we have seen the real number representation and eventually how that real number is stored in within a computer system. That means IEEE 754 floating point standard, and there we have studied about the normalization, everything about how the real numbers are stored. Right, then I think it is a continuation of there we have seen two precisions, single precision and double precision, and how eventually a number is stored, a real number, floating point number is stored within a computer system in any electronic device. And after so up to this we have studied about how any integer or any real number, any decimal number or any integer number can be represented in binary, and how eventually they are represented within a computer system as well as any electronic device that supports that kinds of numbers. But after numbers, eventually we have to know how to represent any information, and for that we have studied the ASCII chart. I think it is not loaded. Yes, it's loaded now. So there we have studied the ASCII chart, how any printable character can be represented in ASCII. Along with these printable characters, there is also an extended ASCII chart that we have not shown you. You can easily find that contains any character, and today this ASCII has been extended to extended ASCII. That ASCII has been extended to extended ASCII, that does not only contain the printable characters, rather the printable characters found on common keyboards, rather it includes now all possible printable characters on any keyboard you can find. But obviously it is not only keyboard characters that are available. It is not only the characters available on keyboard that is sufficient to represent any information on in the universe. In fact, there are several languages other than English, right? Multitudes of languages. In fact, ASCII uses 7 bits to represent information. That is, and it is 0 is used to extend it to 8 bits. Extended ASCII uses complete 8 bits, and it has been extended further into Unicode. That uses 16 bits to represent a character. Just 1 second, wait for 2 minutes. Okay, sorry for the interruption. So what I was discussing is that Unicode, it has been extended to 16 bits. That now includes most common languages. That means the symbols of the most common languages, including Devanagari, that means Hindi. So that's how, in fact, now you can represent any information in any language, in fact, obviously not very uncommon languages, in any common languages all around the world. So now after the information representation, then we have seen the some special representation of IEEE 754 floating point format, because every information is not available in IEEE 754 floating point representation. As for example, if the exponent part is 0, if you can remember that in IEEE 754 floating point format, the first bit was the sign bit in single precision, next 8 bits was the exponent bit, and the last 23 bits was the mantissa bit. This is for the single precision, which is represented as float data type in C in 32 bits, and in the double precision is 1 bit sign bit, and in the double precision the sign was still 1 bit, exponent was of 11 bit, and this is of 52 bits, and this is double 64 bits. Okay, and if the exponent field turns out to be 0 and mantissa field both turns out to be 0, it represents the number 0. Whereas if the exponent field is 255, then mantissa, depending upon the mantissa, if it is 0, then it represents infinity, right? Whether it is positive infinity or negative infinity depends upon the sign bit. And if mantissa is not 0, then it represents an invalid number, not a number. It is represented as not a number that gets generated when you divide something by 0. That means you perform some invalid arithmetic operations. This number gets generated, not a number. In fact, we will look into this in much detail. So we will perform various arithmetic operations and in C. Then after binary, you have seen here about the two more common representations of numbers, hexadecimal and octal. Among them, hexadecimal is the most commonly used to represent huge binary numbers. In fact, you have some huge binary numbers like 64-bit binary number or 128-bit binary numbers. Group the number in 4 bits and simply just represent each 4 bit into the corresponding hexadecimal digit, and you'll get a much smaller representation without losing any information, but the representation will be much smaller. Octal is grouping into 3 bits, but hexadecimal is the most common one used. And then we have went into the details of how everything works inside the computer. That means how the computer logic circuits are built up. We have seen the design of examples logic circuits like half adder and full adder, and there we have seen that eventually how the addition, binary addition, is done. We have seen here a 4-bit full adder to perform the addition of two 4-bit numbers. Obviously, today's computer processors, they use much more advanced adder circuits rather than this one. And one example of that is carry look ahead adder that calculates all the carries previously, rather than adding here and then forwarding the carry. This adder now waits as long as this carry is not coming, and so on. So this adder is extremely slow. So if you could calculate all the carries even before addition, that would be much faster because all the full adders could be able to work parallelly in that scenario, and that is the idea of carry look ahead adder. It is a much advanced circuit, and those who have computer architecture in your course will study this circuit there. And then we have seen the same adder circuit, how it can be used as a subtractor as well. In fact, the same circuit used for addition and subtraction. It is control unit that sends a signal whether the addition or subtraction needs to be performed, and control unit understands this signal, and obviously as well as other signals, what the operation user needs to be performed, what a user needs to perform. The control unit understands that, because the instruction that comes from memory to processor, it comes to control unit, and control unit decodes that and sends the corresponding signals all around the motherboard, all the ports, and if it's some arithmetic operations to the corresponding ALU, and so on. Then we have went further inside into how a computer works, like how it is still not being loaded. I think the network is a bit slow, but let me tell you, as far as I can remember, we have taught here how the instructions, okay, here we have seen that the registers, right, the registers, in fact registers are an integral part of the processor. The registers are the temporary storage for any operation. Eventually any operation needs to perform some operation on data, right? Without data there is no point in performing any operation. So the data comes in RAM along with the application. The data comes in RAM, right? Or if the user provides some input either via keyboard or via mouse, that data comes from the corresponding keyboard or mouse again to the RAM, in fact to the corresponding application, and OS does that. OS carries that information as a result of interrupts. I think we have also discussed that part as well, but anyway, any application is operation on data, and that data needs to be brought into register before performing the corresponding operation, right? So registers are the temporary storage. It is much faster than the RAM. In fact, in terms of speeds, registers has the highest speed, right? Then RAM, and then hard disk in terms of speed. Okay. It is designed using much advanced, in fact it is called the SRAM technology, but you will understand that in much details when you study about the electronics. The registers have the highest speed, more speed than RAM, and RAM has more speed than hard disk. Whereas in terms of cost, registers are the most costly. That's why RAM is not created using registers technology. In fact, there is a time cost trade-off. Speed cost trade-off. The higher the cost, the higher the speed as well. So obviously, if you have to reduce the cost, you cannot create all the elements using the registers technology, using the flip-flops. You cannot. The cost will be huge. The cost of the computer would be huge. So registers are kept only for temporary data, which is used in the operation. You will understand everything about them in details, about the speed cost trade-off and everything in the computer architecture course. And here we have seen that how addresses are in fact represented in hexadecimal. Then we have seen the various bus, right? How the data and the address are passed from one part of the architecture to another part, and there we have seen three types of bus: the address bus, data bus, and control bus, right? I think you can remember these parts. And eventually in the evolution of program, here we have seen that the today's programming languages have not come directly. Rather, the first languages are the direct machine language instructions. Right, the first programs were the machine language instructions. But programming that was difficult, so programmers created assembler. But still, for very large programs, assembler did not meet the criteria, so programmers created compiler. C uses compilation technique. But eventually, uh, at the bottom level, it is instructions in terms of zeros and ones that is getting executed in the machine. And so every program you write in C or any compiled programming languages eventually turns out to be a sequence of zeros and ones. In fact, a sequence of instructions and data. And here we have discussed in details that how that instructions are brought from RAM to control unit, RAM to CPU. Eventually control unit takes that, then control unit decodes the instruction, ALU performs the operation, and then ALU stores the result back as the data in the RAM again. And here we have seen the details of that, complete step by step with various types of instructions. And after looking into the bottommost level of computation, we have come a bit at the higher level, that is operating system, that controls the complete hardware, and it does the job in various parts, because operating system itself is a huge software. In fact, the largest software in your complete computer system is the operating system itself. And it does the job in various parts like process management, memory management, files and IO management, and eventually it checks for the security of the computer system. And obviously, computer security, discussing about computer security is much advanced course, and we cannot give an overview about that. But process management, memory management, and device, files and IO management have been discussed one by one. And so here we have everything about how the memory management, how the pages works, and in the process management, the concept about the process control block, right? How operating system manages the complete, manages everything and creates the complete execution environment. Okay, I think I have not sent this information to you. Eventually, after going out of station, I was. Yes, I'll send that to you, because after going out of station, I became a bit ill. So sorry for that. I'll send this complete information. But any of you have any query regarding the discussion that we have made in introduction till now? Any of you have any query? Okay. So now after finishing all these parts, the next thing that we are going to discuss is life of a C program. Step by step, we are in fact going towards we are entering the domain of C programming language. Now, after studying everything, now I think this is the best place to discuss what happens when you write a C program, and eventually what happens with that program, or to any project that is composed of multitudes of C files. Suppose I have some C program, something like this. Excuse me. Suppose I am writing just say printf hello world. That will print this string hello world on the screen. Okay, and we can even show you that. And if we compile this, I think you already know how to compile this from the lab. Let me show this. This is test.c, and you can see that an executable file called a.out got generated, and this prints hello world. Now what happens, how eventually it created that executable a.out. After creation of executable, you know how it does execute it, because as soon as I wrote this /a.out and pressed enter, this executable file, as you know, this executable file went into RAM, because a.out is on my hard disk. It, as soon as I executed it, it went into RAM. The instructions of a.out got executed one by one, and based upon that commands that control unit received, it told the monitor that show this hello world string on the screen. Now the fact is how, so we have to know how from program. Just 1 second. Okay, so we have to know how from this program this this executable file got generated eventually. So there are multiple steps for that. First is macro processing. I'm not going to the details of this phase at this moment, but macro processing, what it does is that it resolves all macros. And what does it, and what do you mean by macro? Macro itself is not part of the of a complete C program. Rather, they can be considered as helpers to your C program, like say hash include, right? There are multiple macros like that. Hash include, they are not part of the C grammar specifically. Hash include, hash define, rather they are here to make the programming much easier, right? And so on. There are multitudes of macros, and in C all of them starts with the hash, and each of them have very specific characteristics in which they help to write a better program. As for example, hash include. What does hash include do is that it includes the content of this complete whatever you are writing within angular bracket. In fact, this can be written using double quote if that. This is called header file. stdio.h, this is called header file. This stdio.h, eventually this is a system header file, because this has been provided by the C library installed on your Linux system or any within the system, within the operating system, or it is header file can be created by the bolo.
Sir, all the macro things they should start with hash, sir.
Yes, they will always start with hash. In C.
Type def, sir.
Huh?
Type def. typedef.
Type def is not macro.
Yes.
Okay, type def is not macro. Though many confuse that with macro, but what happens is that type def is resolved in the compilation phase, not macro processing phase. Okay, but still I myself will check that one out and will let you know. But as far as I know, the type def is not considered, is not processed in the macro processing phase. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Welcome. So it resolves all macros. Okay, so header file can be system, or user itself can create a header file. User himself or herself can create a header file. In the case of user created header file, you put a double quote. Otherwise, the system header files are put around the angular bracket. In fact, the user created header files at the same location. But I'll discuss about that in much details later when you use double quote and when you use angular bracket. But the main idea here is that the content of this header file will be placed completely before this main function. Okay, so the header file helps you to make your program. If your program is a huge program, rather than writing within a single C file, you can make in small parts, each part performing some useful functionalities, and include those files. Okay. Toward the end of the class, toward the end of this course, I'll tell you how to create a professional project in C or C++, and there we'll see how these header files come into action. And now, as I've said, the hash include helps to bring the complete content of this header file just prior to the int main, and that happens in the macro processing phase. Or if you define, say, some hash, define say type 3, and if you use this type here, say int a equals type, something like that. Okay, this type will be replaced by 3 in the macro processing phase. Okay, now let me show that. Suppose let me put here another define here. Though many of you will not understand what is happening here at this moment, let me just tell you briefly that include brings the complete content of the file at this particular location. Hash define helps you to define a system, your complete project wide global constant. Okay, and when you write int a equals type, this type will be replaced by 3 here. Before compilation, it will happen in macro processing stage. Now, to view the output of the macro processing stage, you use gcc space minus capital E and test.c. Suppose I'm writing, because eventually after macro processing it will still remain a C program. Just the macros have been processed properly. Okay, so it created one test1.c at the same location. It opened up in Beam, that editor I used. Let me open up in Mousepad. And as you can see that there are several lines that have been written here. And see, this type defs is still there after the macro processing, because these type defs have appeared after the macro processing stage. Okay, this complete content that you are seeing here is in fact the content of studio.h. studio.h recursively, and as you can see that hash include is not anymore, hash include studio.h is not anymore there. Rather, the complete content of that studio.h is here all the way up. Okay, that hash define type 3, this int a has been replaced with 3, and that hash define has been removed. Okay, and everything you are seeing here in fact here the declaration of the functions. In fact, just as a check that suppose if I use type def say int char, that's bad name, say int 32, okay, and if I do this, as you can see type def int 32 is still here. It is not processed by macro processor. Okay, so it is not, in fact type def is not macro. So this stdio.h, the content of that stdio.h has been brought completely here. Okay, and this second macro define, this has also been resolved by replacing type with the corresponding 3. In fact, all other possible macros, define, if def, if and def, everything will be resolved in this macro processing stage. And the output that will come out of here will be a C file, a C program without any macro processors, without any macros, that we can say as pure C program. They are only here to help the writing of the code. They are not part of C grammar. Eventually, the compiler that is designed underlying this, they do not process macro. They process the pure C grammar. Okay. And just as another check, I said that there is a system header file, right? So it has brought this content from somewhere, right? Let me show this from where. This is everything I am saying this considering that you are using Linux system. If you go to cd user include, okay, user include, when your Linux system gets installed or when you install the C library, GCC or glibc. In fact, glibc is the name of the C library package of Linux systems. When you install that, all the header files gets installed in the hash user hash include. If you do an ls, I think you have seen these comments ls and cd from your Linux labs. If you do the ls, you should find, yes, this is here, the stdio.h. Okay, so the content of stdio.h from user include gets loaded at that place. And if you want to see this file, you can see this file as well. Let me open up the editor. Yes, stdio.h, as you can see, it has been opened here. Obviously, all the comments have been removed. You did not see the comment here, and everything you can see here, there are further macros. That's why I said it is resolved recursively. stdio.h, before bringing the stdio.h, it resolved these macros further. Okay, that means at the top of, before bringing stdio.h, these contents of these files also was brought into stdio.h, and all the macros have been resolved. Then stdio.h have been put into the beginning of test1.c. Okay. Is it clear till now? Is it clear to you what is happening in the macro processing phase?
Sort of, sir.
Okay. In fact, let me just recapitulate. Suppose in the stdio.h, this is the content of suppose stdio.h. Say there is some hash include bits stdc.h. Suppose then the content of stdio.h. There are several further hash includes and hash defines are spread around that stdio.h. So if the macro processor brings this stdio.h as it is into the current program, it will still contain the macro. It will still contain the macros, right? Because hash include, hash define, they will come from that stdio.h file. So before bringing the stdio.h file, it will resolve these macros as well. That means the content of bits stdc.h will be brought at the top of stdio.h. Okay. Now, if this bits stdc.h contains some further macros, they will be resolved. So it is resolved recursively. Okay. Then at the end there will be one file when there will be no further include, or that means after resolving all the macros, there will be no further macros left. Then it will be included one after another. Suppose stdio.h uses this bits stdc.h. Okay, maybe it contains I don't know what is there within bits stdc.h. Maybe some maybe, or you can check it out.
Sir, is that bit/std one included in PSA?
Which one? Bits? No, not one. Bit/. That means the header file can be found in the bits directory. Okay. At the system location, within the bits directory, the stdc.h header file can be found. It is the directory structure. So if you have some header file within say directory dir1, within dir1, within directory dir2, and within dir2 if there is some header file say header.h, you will include it using hash include dir1 slash dir2 slash header.h. Okay. So this is directory structure. It is not one. Okay. So all the macros will be resolved one by one, and then it will be put into the beginning of the file. Now, so after the macro processing, you can be rest assured there is no macro left in the complete program, and it is a pure C program following the accurate C grammar. So after this, it will be compiled. Compilation will happen. So this was the first stage. This is the second stage. In the compilation phase, the pure C file. Now, in the compilation, it follows the pure C grammar, and the compiler, that's why, can compile this file accurately. The pure C file will be compiled to assembly instructions. Okay. So if we use gcc -s test. Okay, I think I'm not at the previous location anymore. Okay. Now gcc -s test.c, rather let me write test.c before -s, and let's put it output after the assembly stage. Let me put it output in test.s. Okay. S is the extension for the assembly program on Linux systems, and you will have the test.s file ready here. You can see here, and if we open this up, test.s, what you are seeing here, I think some of you have observed this move, right? See, test.c, I am calling the function printf, and you can see that corresponding call to printf here as well. Obviously, they have other meanings at the rate plt and so on, depending upon the assembly instruction, the rules of the assembly instructions on Linux, and I'm not an expert in that. But what you can see here is that this push, this move, this subtraction, right? Everything, this is a complete assembly instruction. Okay, so eventually from this test.c, this has been created, and as you can see that move well. Let me just tell you in brief. In fact, move well, this RBP is a register. Okay, and 4 bytes below that register, it is moving the data 3. Okay, and in fact at that location the variable a is stored. Okay, in fact, now you can think that how it understands which variable will be stored at which location. If I put further variables here, all these variables are 4 bytes in length. They are int. I'll discuss about this in much details later on. When you declare some variable as int, they are each of 4 bytes. RBP keeps the address in the processor. If you do not understand it, don't worry, it is not in syllabus. This is just for interest, I'm saying. In the RBP, there is one register available in the processor. It stores the starting address of data. In fact, this name is base pointer. This is the base where the data of your application starts. A is 4 bytes. It will take 4 bytes, so it is 4 bytes below that base pointer. B will be 8 bytes below that base pointer, and C will be 12 bytes below that base pointer, because all of them are in size 4. So that's why 4 bytes below the base pointer, it is storing the variable 3. It is storing the value 3, and that's what we're seeing here. Okay, so that's how assembly instructions are generated. And in fact, this is the assembly instruction corresponding to this particular program, and that gets generated in the compilation phase. Now, after the compilation, after the assembly instruction gets generated, let me write the corresponding say gcc say test.c -s then -o test.s. -s switch tells the GCC that to generate the assembly file. To see the macroprocessing output, GCC test.c -E and put that in test1.c. Okay, that means redirect the output into another C file, because eventually after macroprocessing it is still a C file. But here it is not anymore a C file. This is not a C program anymore. This is assembly program. Now, once we have the assembly instructions available to us, this will be the assembler will come into action, right? And assembler will convert the assembly instruction to machine instructions. Okay, that means in terms of zeros and ones. In terms of 0 and 1. Okay. Now, to obtain that output, In fact, uh, let me mention one thing, that the final machine instruction file, it is the binary file, right, that gets generated, it has a name that is called the object file. The binary file generated is called object file. Now, whether it is an executable file, it is not necessary that this will be the final executable file. When your program, when your project is composed of a single program, like say test.c, in that case this will be an executable file as well. So gcc test.c, if you write -o set test.o as well, in fact generally the object files are kept with the extension .o, but when you have a single C file and you know that the final the machine instruction file is eventually will be the final executable file, it is not necessary to put a .o there, and you'll have this executable file test created. And if you do not provide that -o, it will use a default executable file name called a.out. Okay, eventually you can execute this test as well. But when you will have multiple C files in your project, which is most common in the project, a large project consists of hundreds to thousands of C files. When your project will consist of such multiple numbers of C files, obviously this will not create the final executable file, because the final executable file will involve all machine instructions from all the files that have been generated, right? But the machine instructions that have been generated here is the file, the machine instructions only from the test.c. Okay, gcc test.c -o set test, and you can put a test.o, considering that we have multiple files now. So if we have multiple files now, if we have multiple object files, the next phase that comes is linking. Here multiple object files are linked to create the final executable file. I'll discuss this step and I'll show with two C files which are dependent on each other, and I'll show that that two individual C files, they cannot create the executable file. Each of them will create object file, and then by linking them we will finally create the final executable file from that two C files, and I'll show that tomorrow because it is already stripped. So this step I'll show this tomorrow. Okay, any query to today's discussion?
सर
हाँ बोलो.
ये ऑब्जेक्ट फाइल क्या होता है?
Object file is the file that has been generated from the assembly instruction file, and that file contains the binary instructions, machine instructions from that particular C file. Okay.
Okay.
In fact, you will come to know about these object files in much details tomorrow when I'll show you multiple two object files. In fact, obviously I'll show that with two C files for now, two object files, and they will be linked to create the final executable file. The first object file, each object file is individual machine instruction equivalent of the C file of you have written. Okay. Any other query? Any other query? Okay. So I'll keep my discussion up to this now. We'll see you tomorrow at 2 to 3. I'm stopping the sharing and I'm stopping the recording.